Hey guys, so I'm almost ready to jump back on the infield. I have all the parts I need now, and honestly, I took a couple weeks off. I just need a little break from this thing, but I'm going to jump right back on it this week. But tonight, I'm going to do the break-in service on my Ducati. It just hit 621 miles, which is the kind of odd number for this thing to get broken in. And I'm going to start with the oil and filter change. I'll show you how to do that. And in the next couple days, I'll adjust the chain if needed, and just check everything else. But the big one is the oil and filter change, and it's surprisingly easy on this bike. So let's get started. Now, I would normally use a rear stand when I do oil changes, and this is a single-sided swing arm, so it's actually really easy on this bike. But I'm going to do it on the side stand for a couple reasons. And first of all, I'll show you what I'm doing. It's not right on the side stand. I've got it propped up just a little bit. So I've propped it up on a book, and it's not completely upright, but it's pretty close, but not quite enough where it's at risk of tipping over. But I do want it to be leaning just a little bit to the left, and I'll show you why. So there's the drain plug right there, and you can see it's on the back of the kind of the extension of this pan. So if I lift the rear tire up with the stand, what's going to happen is now it's going to be leaning forward a little bit. So that's kind of counterproductive when you want it to drain from the back. So that's why I want to leave both wheels on the ground. And then if you kind of come around, you'll see that the bolt is kind of at the left of that pan. So that's why I also want it leaning just a little bit to the left. So that's going to give me the best angle to get as much drained out of here as possible. So these V4s are kind of notorious for holding oil, and it's one of the very few bikes I actually drain the oil cold. And the reason for that is just it takes so long for it to really fully drain back in the pan that if you kind of heat it up and circulate it through the engine, by the time you're going to get everything drained out, the oil is going to be cold anyway, so it kind of defeats the purpose. So I know a lot of dealers drain this cold. Most dealers I know drain it cold. I'm not sure, technically what it says in the service manual. I've heard it says cold. I don't have a service manual for this, but the best way to drain these V4s is just let it cool down, let everything drain in the pan. It's been about 14 hours since I rode this last, so it's cold, everything's drained, and it's ready to go. So everything's kind of conveniently clustered here on the bottom. So again, you've got your drain bolt right there, and then the filter housing is right here. Now that's an aftermarket sump guard. So I'm going to take that off. That actually just goes on top of the stock oil filter cover. So I'm just going to take that out, and then I'll show you how to take the cover off. It's not tricky, but it's unusual. So I'll show you to get that off. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drain the oil. I'm going to take this off. I'm going to remove the filter, then replace the filter, and then we'll fill it back up. But it's a little bit of a process, but we'll go through it step by step. So a friend of mine kind of turned me on to this. After I drain the oil, I'm going to pour it in this measuring cup, so I know exactly how much came out. You can measure by quarts or liters on this. And I'm going to do it for a couple reasons. Just lets me know exactly how much came out of the bike, and also will ensure I don't overfill it, because I'll put back exactly what I took out. I'm going to have to put a little bit more in. The bike isn't low. It's not low on oil, but it's kind of right at the bottom line on the Cyclass. So I'll add just a little bit to it. Plus, I'm not going to be able to get an exact reading because there's still going to be a little bit in the oil pan I poured from and whatnot. But it'll still give me just a really good idea of what came out and what I need to put back in. I've just got the cap kind of resting on top. It'll just allow air to go through there and the oil will drain better. All right, real quick, you can see the crush washer right here. Just make sure you get that. Or if you're replacing it, which you should, I'm going to replace mine. Just make sure it's not stuck onto the side of this. You don't want two crush washers on there, it might leak. But if you're replacing it and it falls into the oil, it's not a big deal. And you can see I also have an open pan because I'm going to pour this into that measuring cup later. So how this works, there's the sump guard, and you can see there's 3 screws. There's the third one. There's 2 in the back, and then that one in the front. And they go through the sump guard, through the cover, and then they thread into the case. But the cover itself is threaded, but the threads are bigger. And what you use that for is you use these bigger M8 screws, and they thread into the cover, but then they stop dead on the casing itself. And by screwing these down, it'll pull the cover out because the cover's on there tight. What's holding that in are 2 rubber O-rings. And sometimes you can just sort of hand tighten these screws to get it out. Sometimes you can't. So we'll see how tight it is, but that's how you get this cover off to get to the oil filter. And never take a screwdriver and try to pry it in between the cover and the casing. You'll just end up gouging and damaging it. So always use these M8 screws to get this thing off. And what this sump guard does, it just sort of protects that downward protrusion from the oil pan that just kind of sticks out there. And if anything hits it, if you crack that somehow, I mean, this whole bottom piece has to be replaced, and that's just going to be a expensive pain in the ass. So these are relatively cheap, and it just kind of puts a shroud over it, and so you won't bottom out on like a speed bump or something like that, or something on the highway. It's not going to hit it and crack it. So I suggest anyone that has one of these bikes, get a sump guard. I've been able to do a little bit by hand, but it's pretty tight, so I'm going to use a screwdriver on a ratchet just to get the rest of this off. Just take your time and work it evenly. It'll come out. This one's pretty tight, but it's coming. Now, the oil filter is a cartridge, and it's just sort of up in there, so you just have to, there's no easy way to do it. Just sort of stick your finger in there and just kind of grab it the best you can until you can work it out. I got it. Just kind of wiggle it back and forth. It'll come out, but it's in there. It's just a long cartridge. So I thought that was a hole right there at the bottom, but it's not. That's a piece of rubber. There's nothing there. It's just like a little wall. So I thought I could get a little pliers in there and pull it out, but there's nothing to really grab. So just kind of get your fingers in there and just, shake it around, and it'll drop out. Okay, everything's pretty much drained out. I'm going to just sort of let it drain for like another half hour, 45 minutes. I'm actually going to run upstairs, grab something to eat. But, it's like one drop every 30 seconds. I mean, the bulk of it's out. And, there's an oil cooler here at the bottom, and that could have as much as a quarter liter in it. So if you're not draining that, you're not going to get everything out. So, some people like to let these sit overnight. If you drain this cold, an hour is really all you need. And you're going to get, even if there's like 1% still in there, it's not going to hurt anything. The new oil filter will clean it out. So again, I'm just going to let this drain for a little bit longer. I'm going to go upstairs, and then we'll put this thing back together. Bagel sandwich. Cat. Okay, I'm back. It's been a good 2.5 hours that this has been draining. So I think we can start putting it back together. Nothing is even dripping out of it anymore, so it's as empty as it's probably going to get. So it's a little hard to see, but there's some metal filings on the magnet on the end of the oil plug, which is perfectly normal. Actually, it'd be kind of weird if there was nothing there. But it just shows that the break-in worked in properly, just a little bit of wear from the piston rings and whatever. But that's not bad at all. That's perfectly normal. And what you want to do, just wipe it all off, get it completely cleaned up, replace the crush washer, and then it's ready to go back in. All right, so it's cleaned up. I have the new crush washer on there. And I moved the oil pan because I don't want to risk dropping it in there. And nothing more is coming out, so just screw it on. All right, as far as how tight, it's just snug, but without being too tight. I mean, this is, I think it's magnesium, and you definitely don't want to over tighten this. So just kind of go with how it felt when you took it off, but just kind of snug. It's got that crush washer, so it's going to crush, but that's it. Not too tight. All right, so the new oil filter can only go in one way. There's a hole on one end with a little like rubber seal, and then there's nothing. It looks like a hole, but it's actually just like a rubber wall. So just push it up into the chamber, and then you'll feel this just sort of snap into place. There it goes. All right, so I cleaned up the oil filter cover, and I'm ready to push it back on. And you can see the two rubber O-rings on there now. It's only been about 600 miles. So in my opinion, these are in perfect shape. You don't have to replace these. They're not going to degrade after 600 miles. So I'm just going to put a little slick of oil on there and reuse these. And I've got new O-rings, but I'll wait until the second or third oil change, and then I'll replace these. I mean, I feel like it's a bit ridiculous to take these off and put new ones on after only 600 miles. So I bet it's not going to leak. I've done this many times before, different types of covers, but I've reused O-rings for oil filters or covers, and I've never once had a leak. So for the first oil change, I say just reuse. As long as they're in good shape, just reuse the ones that are on there. All right, it's tight. I'm not going to bang on it. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put the screws in and screw it down so it's on there. And then I'm going to take the screws out and put the sump guard on there and then screw everything down. And just make sure to do it evenly, a couple turns at a time on each one. Okay, so the cover's back on. The screws are a little snug, but not too tight. So now I'm going to take them off, but the cover's going to stay on. It's not going anywhere. And then I'm going to put the sump guard back on, tighten everything down. And again, the sump guard just fits right on top of the cover and screws right on. It's that simple. All right, the sump guard is back on, and again, snug but not too tight. So by tightening the sump guard, that's also going to tighten the cover, so everything is in place now. And also, you saw the drain plug. So now we're ready to fill this sucker back up. Okay, so I use this open pan because again, I'm going to pour this now into the measuring cup and see exactly what I took out. And it wasn't low, but it was at the bottom line of the sight glass before I took this out. So I'm going to put just a little bit more in than I took out. But you always want to, it's much better to put too little in than too much. So you don't want to overfill. So what I'll do is I'll probably put exactly what I put in, start it up, just kind of let everything cycle through. Wait a couple hours, see what it looks like in the sight glass, and then if I need to top it off a little bit, I'll do it. All right, hopefully this does not become an incredible disaster, but it's got a lip on it, but the pan is kind of wobbly. It's thinner plastic that I like, so hopefully this goes well. Okay, that went well. So if you look on that side, you can see it's almost 3/4, or on this side, it's just a little bit more than 2.5 liters. So now I know exactly what came out, and I know what to put back in. So I'll put just a little bit more than 2.5 liters, or almost 3/4 in, check the sight glass, start it up, and then we'll wait a couple hours, come back, see what the sight glass says, and I'll probably have to top it off just a little bit. Ducati wants you to use their Shell Advanced synthetic oil, but it's very hard to find. I couldn't find any of this locally, but there is a perfect equivalent that most dealers use because, again, this is hard to find, and it's basically the same thing. And it's this right here. And as always, I use gunk to get the oil off. This stuff is so great. It's such a great degreaser. Doesn't harm aluminum or matte finishes or magnesium. Gets all the oil off. It's just such good stuff. So this is what I use, just a little bit of oil that got on the case and at the bottom of the muffler guard. I use this, and it just takes it right out. It's really good stuff. So the oil level was right between the lines in the sight glass before I started it up that first time. And I waited a couple hours, came down, and it was then right at the bottom of the sight glass, which is to be expected. I mean, the oil filter is going to fill up, and it just goes through the engine. I expected it to go down a little bit. So I top it off a couple times. You want to be real careful. You don't want to overfill it. And you'd be amazed at how little oil it takes to kind of move the level up in the sight glass. But after a couple top offs, it was again right between the lines in the sight glass. So I took it for about a 10-mile ride, came back, let it sit overnight, and then the next morning it was still right between the lines. So it's now good to go. It's broken in from an oil change standpoint. So the next thing to do is to clean, lube, and adjust the chain, and then it's ready to go. The only downside with this bike is you're going to have a persistent service reminder on the dash. There's no way to get rid of it unless you have the dealer plug the bike into the computer and then they can turn it off. Now, just keep in mind, you're not going to gain any performance. You don't get any kind of ECU remap or anything like that after the break-in. All they're doing is turning off that service light and I guess maybe doing a diagnostic, but that's it. I know some high-performance BMWs, I think they actually do unlock some performance after the break-in, but that's not the case here. I think they even actually put a different sprocket on, so you'll have a different tooth count. But with these Ducatis, it's what you get right off the showroom floor is what you get. There's no additional performance improvement unless you flash it yourself. So again, there's no harm to have that service reminder on your dash, but if it bothers you or you want to get rid of it, the only way to do it is have the dealer turn it off for you. Now, I've got a dealer here that's actually really cool about it, and they don't charge me much, and they'll plug it in and do it for me, but not all of them will. A lot of them will claim if they don't do the service, they're not going to do it. But again, it doesn't hurt anything. You might just have to live with that little signal on your dash. So thanks again for watching. I hope this was all helpful. And if you have one of these V4 Streetfighters or the V4 Panigale, they're basically the same thing. Definitely do the oil change yourself. I mean, it's going to be done right, and again, you'll save some money. And so my Suzuki Gixxer 750, it's almost at 600 miles, so I'll do the break-in service on this as well. The oil change, chain adjustment, and just kind of an overall inspection. And it's not hard, but I do have to take that left fairing off to get to the oil filter, but that's not really a big deal. And it's a screw-on oil filter, so that's at least easier than the cartridge type on the Ducati. And then I promise I'm going to get back to the Enfield and get this thing knocked out. I still have that issue with the clutch where it's slipping so easily. I can't even get the piston to turn over with the Kickstarter. But I've got the new clutch basket in plates, so hopefully that's going to solve the problem, and then we can get this thing knocked out. I mean, we're close. Its engine is basically rebuilt, and there's just a few more things to do, and it should be ready to start up and run. So that's coming. I promise it's coming. And I'll also review this bike. I'll review the Ducati. I'll review the Suzuki. And I was going to do that earlier, but I was just kind of waiting to break them in just so I can kind of ride them normally. for the review. So all of that's coming up soon. So thanks again for watching. And if you're new, please subscribe and stick around. A lot of cool stuff is coming up. And until next time, guys. And check this out. They put like 24 electric chargers in my garage. But don't worry, I'm not getting an electric bike. It's called cycling with gasoline for a reason.